My name is Alexander Fink, and I lead the Institute for Faith and Science in Germany. And I'm very glad that today I can have a good conversation with Sharon Dirckx. Sharon Dirckx has studied biochemistry and did a PhD in brain imaging and also a postdoc, and then worked for the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, and now is an author and speaker on many very interesting subjects. For example, she published on brain and neuroscience, and she published on the question of suffering. So welcome, Sharon.
Thank you.
We will talk about what does it mean to be human in a world of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. That will be the overarching topic today. And my question is, why should we have this conversation? Why is that topic relevant? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that AI is something that comes into our lives on a daily basis. On a very practical level at home, we are interacting with AI through our smartphones. We're exposed to algorithms that pop up on our computers. And we're interacting with things like Alexa, Google, and Siri. And of course, AI is featuring in life, sometimes kind of replacing humans in certain roles in society. We've begun to see that already. And we're hearing about it on the news all the time. And so the question that we're needing to address now is, what is the relationship, what should be the relationship between humans and AI in all of its different forms? And in order to answer that question, we need to ask the question, what does it mean to be a human being? What is it that's unique about us in order to answer what our relationship with artificial intelligence should be?
You are also a unique human being. And so my question would be, how did you yourself actually come into contact with that topic? Via brain imaging, or what is your relationship with that topic?
Yes, my background is in brain imaging. So I spent a number of years, over 10 years, in functional MRI research, and had some exposure to the way in which brain and mind interact, and that was very helpful because I later on, when I moved into the area of Christian apologetics, it provided a wonderful kind of intersection for me to look at the question, are we just our brains? Because there's a view out there that human beings, what is it to be a human being? Well, a lot of people say we are just the neurons inside of our skulls. And so I spent some time asking, well, is that true? Where does that view come from? Why do people think that? And of course, there are many implications to that view. If we are just our brains, then do our thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, do they come from us, or do they come from forces beyond our control? So there are implications for free will and for meaning, in fact. But there are also implications for something like AI. If human beings are entirely material, and if their minds are material, then in theory they could be replicated artificially. And so I came at this question through the question, am I just my brain? Which is also the title of a book that I have on that topic.
Yeah, you touched already on quite a few subjects, but as you have worked in science, in the lab even, would you say that doing research as a scientist actually challenged your faith more, or did it enrich your faith more? How did you perceive that?
Yes, well, my journey to faith actually happened while I was studying biochemistry. So I grew up in a kind of religiously neutral home where I didn't really know what I believed, except that I wanted to be a scientist. And I actually came to discover at university in the very first week that you didn't have to choose between God or science, that actually these were two complementary ways of looking at the world. And about halfway through my biochemistry degree, I became a Christian. And so I began my research in brain imaging maybe 2 or 3 years after that point. And so I had already settled in my mind the question of the interaction of God and science, and it was through that I came to faith. And so being a scientist in that setting wasn't a challenge. I'm not saying that the science wasn't challenging. It had its challenges.
I understand, yeah.
Yes. And in fact, it was, a wonderful kind of privilege to be able to study part of the world that God had made using technologies that he had enabled to come to the foreground. And of course, brain imaging is a wonderful way of looking inside the human body without cutting into it. Whereas historically, people used to have to rely on post-mortem studies and extreme disease states. Now you could study healthy volunteers as well. So it was a wonderful way of studying the phenomena in the natural world, but also knowing the God who made it all. It was a wonderful enhancement of my beliefs.
Yeah. So did you also produce these nice, colorful pictures? And which region of the brain were you specialized in?
Yeah, so yes, I did. Although those are produced not in real time, although maybe they are now because the technology's moved on, but that you analyze them over days and you get nice blobs that appear in Hollywood movies and so on, as well as but I was, for my PhD, I was at an early stage in brain imaging when it was just emerging, and I was looking at some of the methodology behind the technique and what kind of parameters produce what kind of quality of functional MRI images. So I was looking at the effect of slice orientation and the effect of levels of hemoglobin in volunteers, because it relies on blood flow changes, and blood flow is obviously heavily influenced by hemoglobin, which carries oxygen around the body. So my PhD was very methodological, probably not very interesting, but necessary, which a lot of PhDs are. Anyway, so my postdoc was actually a bit more interesting, looking at human cocaine abuse. So this was in the States at the Medical College of Wisconsin, looking at what happens in the brain when someone is given intravenous cocaine. This was an ethically approved study. So the volunteers were already cocaine users, severe cocaine users. And yeah, I was contrasting that with another drug that wasn't considered to be as addictive. And we were looking at the sites of action using functional MRI.
And I can imagine that these pictures really have a powerful message to the one who's analyzing these pictures. And you could easily think like, okay, we add this drug and the brain changes and the person changes in their reactions. So actually, it seems like a natural conclusion that aren't we just our brains?
Yeah.
Is a human being nothing but the neurons in the brain?
Yeah.
So how would you respond to that? Or would
Yeah.
you say there is more, and why is there more?
Yeah, it's really important that we look at this, because you're absolutely right. I mean, what we clearly see in the neuroscience is that mind and brain are connected. I mean, we'll get to, we don't just have a brain, we also have a mind, and but the science merely tells you that those things are connected. So if you put someone in an MRI scanner and you give them cocaine, which is not a normal thing to do, but anyway, that was what my research was on, they will experience the impact of that cocaine. They will have a conscious experience of that cocaine, and also their brain networks will light up, and we can see those very clearly. So clearly conscious experience and brain activity are connected. But the nature of that connection is not something that the scientific method can tease out. If you want to propose the nature of interaction between conscious experience and brain activity, you're then stepping into the realm of philosophy to impose a particular worldview. And of course, the presumed landscape of science in this day and age is materialism. We assume that material explanations will account for everything. But one of the things that is very important in this whole conversation is that we don't just have a brain, we also have a mind. And those are two very different things, and actually physical explanations cannot access the mind.
I would love to know more about that. Why do you think that? Because we can give a person, calculate what is 8 times 7, and then certain regions in the brain become active. So why is the mind not just a function of brain activity?
Yeah, well, great question. So philosophers refer to something called qualia, which is in its singular quale or plural qualia, which are qualitative experiences. So imagine we had a cup of coffee sitting here on the table, and the materialists are correct, and all that we have at our disposal are physical descriptions because we live in a material universe. So describe to me the smell of coffee. Well, you might offer me the chemical structure of caffeine, and that would be very interesting and elegant, but it doesn't actually get me any closer to the smell of coffee. Or you might offer me the physiology describing what's happening as I drink the coffee and digest it. And that would also be beautiful and elegant physiology, but it wouldn't get me any closer to the smell of coffee. And actually, if you want to understand and access the phenomenon of the smell of coffee, you need to smell it. There's no other way of accessing that. And this is an example of a quale, or qualia in their plural, qualitative experiences that are impossible to describe physically. And of course, the biggest qualia of all is the qualitative experience of what it is to be you and of what it is to be me. If we were to do a study of what it's like for you to go about your daily life, and we attach an EEG cap onto you and measure continuous EEG signal from deep within your brain that's transmitted to your scalp, and we could punctuate your day with some visits to an MRI scanner and put you in the scanner and take some structural scans and some functional scans. We get some very interesting data from your brain. But will that tell us what it's like for you to go about your daily life? Well, it won't. I presume you agree.
Because I think so, yeah.
Yes, we can take all the data from your brain that we like, but in order to access what it is to be you, we need to ask you. There's no other way of accessing that. And for this reason, many philosophers and scientists who are atheists as well as agnostics believe that mind and brain are two very different things, and it's not enough to chalk it all down to physical processes in the brain.
That actually leads us on to our next question, because you say we are not only our brains, but quite a few scientists believe that. And so they work on artificial intelligence, which actually achieves enormous achievements, I would say. Like when you ask ChatGPT, what is it like to take cocaine and what happens, it will write a complete essay on that with a lot of scientific footnotes and so on. So do you think that artificial intelligence in some way will be able to think like human beings? Does it think like human beings? And might it even become conscious one day?
Yeah, I think this is fascinating. And, in some ways we have marked the landscape by referring to it as intelligence, which is a very human-sounding word. Humans have intelligence. What do we mean by that when we're talking about AI? And the reality is that actually AI is dealing in the realm of crunching data sets and of outputting things and algorithmic processes going on in the background. But because some of that is outputted in a human-sounding way, it can give the appearance that there's a being in there that has a sense of self, that has an inner life that can be accessed. But the philosopher John Searle, in his thought experiment, The Chinese Room, makes the point that just because something has the appearance of human consciousness, of human-like intelligent qualities, doesn't necessarily mean that it is conscious. And he asks us to picture two people, one inside a closed room and one standing outside of that closed room. The person outside is passing Chinese messages through a hole to the person inside the room. Now, the person inside the room doesn't speak Chinese, but what they have is a Chinese book of symbols, so they can decode the message coming in, work out what it's saying, and work out a response and send that back. Now, to the person outside, it seems like the person inside speaks Chinese, but they actually don't. All that they've learned to do is process Chinese symbols. And this thought experiment is very helpful for us as we think about, can AI think in the same way that humans can? There's a big difference between the ability to process information and being a conscious human being with an inner life and a sense of self and a knowledge of one's past, present, and future, of integrated senses of the world around us, and so on. Those are two very, very different things. We've named it intelligence, but it's actually very different to human consciousness.
And I think we probably even can see the difference when we teach AI something or a child, because when I explain my child, this is a cat and this is a dog, they know from one example what to do. But with AI, learning functions much different, doesn't it?
Exactly. And if you start asking Siri or Alexa, I mean, I know that there are much more complicated versions now, but start asking them existential questions, it very quickly becomes apparent that actually this is a kind of standard answer that they've been programmed to give.
In order not to offend anyone.
Yes, exactly.
So a lot of people are actually worried about artificial intelligence is going to surpass human intelligence and so on. And in some ways, it seems that artificial intelligence actually can process more data in a shorter amount of time. So in which way would you say, should we take care of that worries, or do you think, well, we can be much more relaxed about that?
Yeah, I think that it depends on the area, and it depends. I think it's really important to be aware of the different kinds of AI that are talked about in this regard. So one is narrow AI or weak AI, which is AI where an algorithm has been programmed to perform a very specific task, such as things like dispensing prescription drugs, or being programmed to dispose of a bomb, defuse a bomb, or a kind of popular level example is driverless cars that are being worked on at the moment. That's where actually an algorithm is programmed to perform one very specific task, which they can do to a high level of accuracy and efficiency, which actually surpasses the ability of a human being, potentially. Now, the vast majority of our success in AI is firmly in this category of narrow AI. But philosophers and scientists do talk about other types of AI, one being general AI, where they one day hope that AI won't just be able to be efficient and accurate in one area, but across the board in all areas. They'll be a generalist like human beings are. We're not just really good at one thing, thankfully, we're good at many things. So that's general AI or strong AI. And then there are some philosophers that believe that there's such a thing as super AI, which is where they believe one day human beings will be far surpassed by silicon-based life, and will have invented silicon-based forms of life that will be able to create other versions of themselves and surpass human ability. This still remains very much in the realm of ideology than scientific and technological possibility at this point. Some would argue for every point, so it's really important to be aware of those different categories and where we currently are.
But you just mentioned silicon-based life. What do you mean by silicon-based life?
Well, I mean, as opposed to human beings are carbon-based life, and silicon-based life is essentially where there might be kind of potentially conscious androids that are
potentially,
and that is an important word to include at this point. But I think that our biggest challenges are not in whether AI will become conscious in the way that humans are. I actually don't believe that it will. Precisely because there are unique things about being human, that we're not just material beings. I think our bigger challenges will be in distinguishing between something that has the appearance of human consciousness and something that is authentically conscious as a human being, because I think that we are seeing ever more sophisticated versions of things that mimic human conscious qualities, such as empathy and so on. And it's going to become harder and harder to distinguish between, especially if there's no visual to aid your judgment and discernment. So, and then the other area of challenge is not so much in whether AI can become conscious, but in our regulation of it. The things that AI will and will not do in this world is is determined by what human beings decide it can and can't do. And so, and what the place that we're currently at is that there's been the technology has run ahead of regulation. And people like someone like Geoffrey Hinton, often referred to as the godfather of AI, who used to head up programs at Google, resigned from his post last year in 2023 because of his concerns about where things were headed, and calling for a moratorium on development so that regulation can catch up. And I think that will be one of our biggest challenges. I know that tech companies have started to work on it, but whether they're doing enough, well, time will tell. And so I think we have a responsibility to kind of steward this. And I guess we get to decide the effect and the impact that we want it to have on the human race.
Yeah, definitely. Just a question about Google, because you mentioned that the Lambda chatbot of Google actually is reported to have said that he thinks he has a consciousness. He's conscious. Do you think we should believe that chatbot, or do you think, is he conscious or is he not? Do you have any idea how to approach that question?
I think that this is an example of how it's going to become harder and harder to distinguish between the appearance of consciousness and genuine, authentic human consciousness. I think the conclusion that you reach can't be based on simply the technology. It's based on your philosophical view. Because if human beings are entirely material, then in theory, human consciousness can be replicated artificially. But if you believe that there's more to being a human being than simply matter, then no matter how sophisticated and elegant the technology may become, there will still always be something unique about humans, and human consciousness in particular cannot be replicated. That kind of inner self. And it comes back to the Chinese room. Just because they're outputting a response that says that they are conscious, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are conscious.
They still follow statistical rules in order to determine which word comes next on which question and so on.
Exactly, and they're doing that because a carbon-based life has programmed them to do that.
So you come back again and again that the worldview presuppositions are very important in talking about AI and the potential of AI. So how does a Christian worldview actually impact the way how we think about what it means to be a human being in an AI-dominated world?
Well, you mentioned earlier that, when we talk about AI and the things that it's bringing to us and the way that it's benefiting us, and it is benefiting in many ways, we talk about accuracy and efficiency and productivity. But of course, when we think about what it means to be human at its deepest level, it's really nothing to do with any of those things. To be a human being, fundamentally is to be known and to know that we're loved and heard and understood. It's really nothing to do with our efficiency or productivity. And actually, the Christian worldview has something very significant to say there. It says actually that human beings are made in the image of God. They're made in the image of a greater conscious being. But the relevance of that to this is that our value, it doesn't come from what we generate or what we do or what we produce, whether artificially or just in life in general. It comes from who we are. It's inherent rather than functional. And so on one level, the question of what it means to be human cannot be accessed by AI at all, arguably, because being known and loved, these are qualities that may never be possible using AI.
Other worldviews have a different opinion on that. So that they even can improve humanity by connecting it to artificial intelligence and so on. So how do we as Christians, with our view of the world, actually differ from other worldviews like transhumanism, posthumanism?
Yeah. Yes, transhumanists might kind of see themselves as like, the master and commander of the human race, that actually we can throw science and technology at all of our human weaknesses to improve our physical bodies, our health, to improve the quality and length of human life, maybe even one day to defy death itself or reverse death itself. And so in that respect, humanity is the kind of the supreme power that holds the keys to immortality. And it's just a case of generating enough science and technology to get us there. And then, of course, you've got post-humanists that would say, well, human beings are all very well, but they're actually a stepping stone on the way to a much more advanced form of life that has not arrived yet, but one day will. And they talk about something called the singularity, where the intelligence and ability of artificial life will overtake that of human beings, begin inventing ever complex versions of themselves, and potentially one day do away with human beings altogether. And that's another kind of potential scenario that is talked about and believed by some people. It also features a lot in our films and movies, Netflix series and so on. It still remains very firmly in the realm of ideology. But the Christian worldview treads a path that neither of those views is saying, by saying, look, we are neither the master and commander of the human race, that we could do with it whatever we want and partner with science and technology to improve ourselves, nor is it saying that humans are just a commodity, a stepping stone on the way to something greater. But the Christian perspective is saying that human beings are a high point of creation, that we are an intended high point. This is what God was wanting to create, but at the same time we're made in the image of a being that is higher and greater and bigger than us, and we have a responsibility to God for how we to take care of the natural world and its resources, and to steward that in a way that enables human flourishing. And so I think the Christian worldview speaks into this question by saying that we have a responsibility to steward AI in a way that enables human flourishing, and to minimize the ways in which it oppresses human beings.
So basically, we should be the responsible actors, and we should never pass on responsibility to machines. Is that what you...
I think we need wisdom to know which things can be actually safely handed to an algorithm to do, and which things in which things there is no substitute for human intuition, human kind of judgment, and often the more serious the decision, the implications of that, the more need for caution in it and simply handing it over. I think sometimes we are seeing an abdication of responsibility, where we're handing decision-making capacity to algorithms when actually you need a human being made in the image of God looking at that and considering it. I think in many areas it's a symbiotic relationship. The transhumanists are definitely onto something in the sense that we are to work together with science and technology. It's not all bad, but it's not the overarching theme of life. It's something that can be used to relieve some forms of suffering, but we don't have the capacity to entirely shape our own destiny.
And it seems to me that the vision of transhumanism and posthumanism is between, like, there is a longing for good news, like immortality, not having to die and to suffer anymore,
yes,
overcoming the weaknesses of being human. And on the other hand, posthumanism, like even this longing might lead us into the end of humanity. The last invention we will have done is AI, some people say.
Yes.
And so how do you think the gospel can speak into this,
yes,
into these hopes and
yes,
dystopias of transhumanism and posthumanism?
Yeah.
What does the gospel mean in the world of AI?
Yeah, there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that says that God has set eternity in the human heart. Whatever you believe about God, there is a longing for eternity. And I think that actually both of these perspectives, transhumanism and posthumanism, reflect that longing for greatness, to live to survive the death of our bodies. And actually, the Christian faith says actually we received the final upgrade already in the person of Jesus Christ, because he lived and died and rose again, defeating death already 2,000 years ago on earth. And anyone that follows him and puts their trust in him, the same will be true of them. And so this, eternal life or immortality, if you like, is not something that will come through just more and more sophisticated developments in science and technology, but it comes through a relationship with the living God who has already defeated death and welcomes us into an eternal relationship with him.
Yeah, wonderful. And not only overcoming our physical weaknesses and mortality, but even overcoming our moral deficiencies and our longing to be loved, as you mentioned before. So
Yes.
the gospel really is as important today and as relevant today as it ever was. And AI is just another expression, isn't it, of our longing and our needfulness for salvation, actually.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Sharon. It was very interesting to talk to you. And I hope that the listeners will also learn from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.